Hello and welcome once again to the No Franchise Fatigue podcast presents The Good, the Bad, the Weird, and the Wild, our monthly podcast where we analyze one particular cinematic voice and pick 4 films out of their filmography, one choice for each category: good, bad, weird, and yes, you guessed it, wild. I'm your host for this holiday episode, Matt, and with me, as usual, preparing for an especially festive Christmas shootout and also preparing his quips is my co-host, Sean. How are you doing today, good sir?
Insert quip here.
Oh, oh, that's not funny, Sean. No, don't you laugh at that. That's bullshit. That was oh oh I already hate this episode. All right. So for the month of December, we have lined up a couple of specialty episodes for our listeners to celebrate the season. We are calling this month Black Christmas. Now, unlike Sean's previous, also unclever title, this one's not particularly a clever title, but it perfectly suits the 2 different episodes we are releasing this month. So, I mean, for good, the bad, the weird, and the wild, if we're talking about Christmas, I feel like there is only one person that should come to mind.
So, born to a father in the printing business, a young Shane Black developed a lifelong love of hard boiled fiction that can be seen in the snappy dialogue his characters share across a variety of film genres. Reasonably well regarded as a character actor and director, today we're focusing on his undeniable prowess as a writer.
Shane Black. See, now I was kind of worried about this episode, let's be honest. In terms of good, the bad, the weird, the wild, partially because I don't know if I dislike any Shane Black movie.
Yeah?
I don't know. Like I think as a child of the 80s that I grew up with Shane Black. Shane Black in terms of a writer and then later on as a director certainly influenced how I saw movies, whether it's a lot of his early stuff, the stuff that he was writing, but his influence as a writer, considering that his career is rather short,
Mm-hmm.
technically speaking. I mean, there's writers out there that have hundreds of credits under their name, and he doesn't, despite being such a prolific writer and at one time the highest paid writer in Hollywood. But it's interesting to kind of look at his filmography as a writer and realize how much he impacted how Hollywood cinema structures scripts and how they approach things. And I think that's a fantastic reason why to pick Shane Black.
And that's all before even mentioning that he more or less literally invented the buddy cop genre as we know it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and something I'm sure we'll get into as we go along and start picking our films, but Shane Black has an incredible amount of tropes that he likes to use, and these are tropes that were adapted by other people.
Yes. Although there are a few that remain uniquely him, not the least of which being the reason for the season. He is a man that loves Christmas.
He loves Christmas. He loves blowing up Christmas.
Oh boy, does he.
And that's and even before we get into these first films, I think that it should be mentioned that, I mean, there's arguments all over online about whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie and blah 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 blah. And what's really interesting about Shane Black is that all of his movies have that kind of similar feel. They all take place around Christmas and use elements of Christmas, but are not necessarily Christmas themed.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. There's not this theme behind it. More often than not, it's just an interesting visual standpoint or an interesting idea to when you look at it.
Dude loves spraying blood on snow.
Yeah, that's true. So true. So, but yeah, so I guess like, you know, my first experience with Shane Black as a film fan was Predator. I
Same.
think is probably the first thing. And although Predator will not be on my list because he is an uncredited writer, he's
So,
uncredited, right?
yeah, he was a pure punch up writer, and it was actually secondary duty to him acting in it.
Right, right. That yeah, he punches it up, does a little polish on the script for Predator, but for me that was kind of my first experience with him, and then moving into like Lethal Weapon and his early films like that, and I f- you know, I think his ability to add in quippy dialogue and snappy pacing just makes him a really interesting writer to look at in terms of in the history of modern cinema and especially modern action cinema.
I agree. So, with all that in mind, Matt, what would you call your good?
See, I was hoping you would go first for good because I have so many. This is a really hard one for me. Literally sat here for like 2 hours before we started recording and was just thinking. I have three of them in mind that I kind of want to juggle around, and I hope we get to talk about all three. But just based on nostalgia and how I like to go through things, I have to say my good is the original, the Lethal Weapon.
Hey, you threaded an incredible needle. That actually didn't make my list at all.
What?
As much
Okay.
as I love this movie, so I'm thrilled to talk about it.
I'm gonna slap you. So yeah, Lethal Weapon. I mean, obviously, my guess is we'll talk about Lethal Weapon in the future at some point during our No Franchise Fatigue podcast because it's a very fascinating franchise in a lot of ways. But Shane Black in the first Lethal Weapon really defines his style, which I think is why I had to put it as my best. As a, like you said, he kind of invented the modern buddy cop movie, the buddy cop action comedy film in a lot of ways.
Well, and on top of that, this movie's even slightly unique in the fact that it's also like got 100 catchphrases and tropes and all kinds of stuff all on its own that are really, really fascinating. And I actually think that the first Lethal Weapon is interesting in terms of the franchise, and since that's obviously all we're talking about here, um, I will only say in that this is the only movie in the franchise where, for example, Riggs is certifiably insane. Like, as he's written in this movie, the dude should be in a hospital.
And that's like you said, that's kind of what makes it interesting. That later on in the films, they
Streak of opening on suicide, by the way.
yeah.
At least he doesn't actually commit, but
Right, right. But yeah, you get this character who's really traumatized and he's torn. He's a veteran, he's on the police force. His wife has just passed away, you know. And what's interesting about him as a character in this film, and again, huge credit goes to Shane Black for writing this line in this movie, is that you feel for him. And you kind of feel for Murtaugh having to deal with this guy. So he does crazy things that are both funny, sad, and then also exciting all at the same time. And so you have this character that's just this ball of energy, aptly portrayed by Mel Gibson. And Mel Gibson's always best when he's just at his craziest, which is I think just carries over into his real life.
that's
But
definitely true. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Real life. True. Yeah.
yeah, we probably should cancel him at this point. But that's when he's always been kind of at his best, is when he's at his craziest. And I think here in Lethal Weapon, he really showcases that. Again, you said all the quotable dialogue. I'm too old for this shit. All of these, you know, days from retirement. You know,
And let's not forget. I mean, yeah. The as far as tropes go, one guy is a couple of days from retirement. You have the secret government agent who is now a regular cop. You have the villain, which, by the way, all-time great Gary Busey performance. Mr. Joshua, who is the shadowy rival from the same military unit who just comes back into Riggs's life. Like this movie is trope the movie.
yeah, and I think we'll talk about continue to talk about this, but he creates a lot of his own tropes in his movies, and once again, this is kind of laying a lot of the groundwork. And between the fantastic performances, the incredible chemistry between Gibson and Glover, and Shane Black's incredible script in this, that does ride that line between being almost too dark for its own good, very, very 80s, in a lot of ways. And then being directed by Richard Donner, who's in his own right an icon of the genre. So I think for me, my best has to go to Lethal Weapon.
So, what I will say for my good is that if he invented a lot of his tropes in Lethal Weapon, I would argue he refined a lot of these tropes in my favorite, The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Oh,
Yeah,
bold choice, my friend.
Black Shane Black's take on the amnesic spy trope. Long Kiss Goodnight to me is the funniest, most quotable, most rewatchable, and most entertaining film way up there with possibly ever made. Like, it is just insanely quotable. And if we're strictly evaluating the writing, I won't overly focus on the pitch perfect casting of Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson as the buddies, which is, as we said earlier, one of Black's favorite tropes. But instead, on the insidiously clever, generic but refreshing plot. This definitely wasn't the first film to use the evil government agent commits treasonous acts supporting terrorism to get funding plot, but it's definitely my favorite. So,
Yeah.
what do you think of The Long Kiss Goodnight, my friend?
I actually really, really wanted to put this as my wild card pick because of all the reasons you said. I have a lot of problems with The Long Kiss Goodnight. It is not a great. I don't think it's his best film, in terms of writing, particularly because he does lean really hard into his.
That might be the tropiest of his movies. This is
Right.
also where he starts kicking in the smart kid thing, which really dominates his later career. A lot of that stuff. So, definitely true.
Right, right. So you get a little bit of that in there. I think Gina Davis, her character is really interesting, and she nails it in this movie. I love, I guess the thing why I would put that as a wild card pick, which I didn't, but I was close to, was the pure energy that this movie has and it's firing on all cylinders in a lot of ways, even when it's making the stupidest choices as a film, whether they're outrunning fire in a hallway, which is just like physically impossible, and then they jump out and then they shoot out the ice and they fall on the ice. But it's like, I mean, he's laying the groundwork for Fast and Furious loss of physics here, but or rolling a semi onto its side through a brick wall, and then the little girl like coming out without a scrape from the back of it. It's a ridiculous movie in a lot of ways, but that's also what makes it a lot of fun, and it might be one of his quippiest movies.
Yeah, I was about to say for every problem you've got, I can honestly give you three Sam Jackson quotes that redeem it.
Exactly. Well, not only him, but everybody. Everybody's.
Oh, Brian Cox is top of his game in this movie.
Brian Cox owns this when he's talking about the dog licking its butt. And
So
it's been.
it's either dislodged or permanently in there.
He's such a dick in it, and I love it. But no, I do not. I would not argue you for putting it on the good, because I do feel like this movie has an incredible amount of energy. I think one of the things that's lacking is a great villain. Not that,
It
not
is
that.
his most forgettable villain, especially in direct contrast to you mentioning Lethal Weapon, because Mr. Joshua is just, there's that scene where he holds his arm out and has the lighter under it, and it's just like, oh shit, this guy's a psychopath. And then, well, what's the scariest thing the bad guy in Long Kiss Goodnight does? Calls the little girl a bitch, which actually is a weird Shane Black trope too. I just realized.
Oh yeah, because I feel like we're gonna get to another movie where he says that, because that might be on my list. He loves to put kids in his movies, and the little girl in Long Kiss Goodnight is certainly a plot device more often than not,
That's true.
but
I love,
it works for me.
I love how her arm's broken specifically to give an excuse for her to be holding the matches at the end. That is such a screenwriter move.
Yeah. And also for Gina Davis to give that really awkward scene where she's like, life is pain, deal with it, get up, and then the little girl says it at the end. Again, it's that perfect screenwriter trope. I I believe at the time that The Long Kiss Goodnight was the most expensive script ever sold, and it essentially killed his career for a short while because the movie did so poorly.
Yeah, it flopped hard. That's admittedly, and I will fully cop to this, but that one was a choice made from my heart, not my head. That's a family classic too. That's one we watch all the time, like at my mom's house and stuff. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I've owned that movie on 3 different formats now. I owned it on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. So I'm a big fan of it myself. So I cannot. All right. So all right, rolling in. You
Yep.
just there's your good. What's your bad?
A while ago, I had a gig quality checking movies for Fox, mostly for international releases. And The Predator was a movie I ended up seeing a lot in that capacity. Let me tell you, if you found this film off putting once, the 75th time does not improve it. Rumors of studio interference are rampant with this movie, and being that it's fathoms below his next worst movie, I'm inclined to believe this one isn't strictly Black's fault, but yipes. Because he directed this one too.
Yeah. Okay. So in all fairness, my choice for the bad is also The Predator. And I know you and I differ on this because I actually don't hate The Predator. Now, you've obviously seen it 1,001 more times than I have, but I've seen it twice at this point. But there's a lot of me that appreciates what he's aiming for in The Predator, particularly partnering up with writer Fred Dekker again. I'm a big fan of Fred Dekker as a writer also, along with Shane Black, and seeing them work together once again, after working in their early career together and being pretty much lifelong friends from what I understand. It was great to see them come back together. It was great to see Shane Black be hired on to approach the Predator universe once again. But the movie is a tonal nightmare. Its tonality is everywhere on the map. The writing is really strange. You can tell there's reshoots. The entire third act feels like it comes out of nowhere.
The studio demanded it take place at night, so the entire third act was literally reshot to take
Yeah.
place at night. It was originally shot in daytime. Yeah, that one's famous.
Yeah. Well, and it's in one of those weird things, there's so much information and evidence of various versions of this movie that are out there. The pictures of the people on the Predator with the Predators on top of the Jeep and things like that exist out there, of things that they shot for this movie that never made it in there. I mean, the multi-ending.
As much as you want to blame the studio entirely on this, let me counterpoint with, I guarantee you a full Shane Black move was having the autistic superhero trope. And that is an uncomfortable trope as we understand, autism more and more. And it really, the kid in this movie is not the best version of a Shane Black kid character. That's for damn sure.
Right, right. And there's a lot of interesting, and so what I said in the beginning was that I think there's an interesting idea that I think that both Shane Black and Fred Dekker were approaching with this film, and that was to not follow the formula for previous Predator movies and distinctly pay homage to them and undermine them at the same time, which is a really, really tricky endeavor. And which is why there's moments in this movie, you mentioned the scene where he's trick-or-treating, because this is one of the few films of Shane Black's that doesn't take place on Christmas. It takes place
Yeah,
on Halloween. So it's still a holiday film. But when he's trick-or-treating and he's got the Predator mask on and he blows up the house with the bullies, the humor in that scene, great Shane Black humor. I'm buying into that scene fully. It just feels like it's in a different movie.
The anything with the crazies bonding on the bus, I thought was really, really good stuff. Like, yeah, because it doesn't matter. It can be universally considered Shane Black's worst movie. The man can write a quip.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of things I appreciate about the film, and I like that there, and we didn't say that there would be a spoiler alert at the beginning of this episode like we normally do, but I like that there was a bad Predator and a good Predator. I think that's a great idea that they have to, and unfortunately, what the movie does is they're like, oh, here's the good Predator, and then he gets killed right away to showcase the strength of the bad Predator. So you never get that moment where you actually see the humans team up with a Predator, which is like, 6-year-old me. That was like my dream, like that was the vision I have. And so as the movie's starting to set that up, I was like, oh, this is going to be badass. And then it doesn't go through with it. And once again, it feels like there's a lot of weird And whether or not he intentionally was undercutting those tropes, I think there is a lot of those intentionality to undercut the tropes. I mean, when he misuses quotes from previous films, where he says "get to the choppas," and
Yeah.
it's motorcycles, not actually helicopters. Like, he's intentionally undermining a lot of these tropes, which I appreciate. It's kind of a mess.
More than kind of. Yeah. And if I may make one special mention of possibly in this era of pathetically desperate attempts to make movie universes, this one's a really bad sequel bait too.
Yeah, well, and then you hear all the rumors about the multi endings that they had for what the Predator Hunter, Predator Killer, what was it? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen this 1,000 times. You should know this. The Predator Killer, what that actually would be at the very end. For listeners out there, if you're interested, we will not delve into the 2 million versions that I've heard at this point, but you definitely should look it up online, because the various endings that they talk about that were considered or even shot.
It wasn't
um,
always an Iron Man suit. Yeah.
yeah, and so um, it does leave it open for a lot of interesting interpretations. The movie did poor enough that we're not going to get those, but in terms of, as a fan of both the Predator franchise and Shane Black, it's hard not to be extremely disappointed.
So, what would you call the weird? There's a fair number of good choices for this one.
Well, and this is why I love Shane Black so much, is because he's trope heavy, he's quip heavy, but he's not afraid to take wild chances like the Predator. So I think, oddly enough, my weird choice is going to be probably his safest film, which is Iron Man 3.
Are you kidding me?
Is that yours?
That is mine. My weird choice. I chose one that is not necessarily a weird Shane Black movie, but it is a very weird Marvel movie. It's got all of Black's fingerprints all over it, the witty dialogue, off kilter humor, broken hero, smart kid, Christmas. Yet, equally, this is a solid, exciting superhero movie that asks the question, who is the hero, Tony or Iron Man? Bonus points to that whole part where he has a makeshift gun and one gauntlet.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I think Iron Man 3 is completely a Shane Black movie, which is also why I think the movie has, I mean, outside of its phenomenal box office revenue and him being a director on it, being his second film directing, I think it was only his second at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a box office hit, but since then, the movie has divided a lot of the fans.
Especially
Particu-
Marvel fans.
exactly. And it's interesting because it is a Shane Black Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, which is two things that I never thought I would necessarily see together. And I, as a Shane Black fan, I adore this film. I adored it when it came out. It's still one of my most watched Marvel movies. When I go back and revisit them for whatever new Marvel movies coming out at the time, this is one that I regularly add in. I'm like, oh, here comes a new Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Better watch those and Iron Man 3, because, like, give me a fucking excuse. That's what I say, to watch it. But I like how they handle it, and there's a lot of, I think that's the biggest part for being the weird for me, is that, right? Is Shane Black in the MCU. The love it and hate it element of it now makes it even a little bit more strange, particularly as they're going to essentially be retconning it in the upcoming new movie with the Mandarin. So that's interesting. But I don't know. I like the bold choices it takes, particularly even with handling the Mandarin.
So I come at this movie from the angle of being a lifelong Marvel zombie. Like, I mean, I've been reading Marvel comics since I was capable of reading. I am a diehard. And so, on top of that, though, obviously, I'm also a huge film fan, and I'm a film fan first. I've been watching films since before I could read. So I'm a believer in adaptation. And one thing I really can't stand is the comic book community's tendency to gatekeep, tell you who and who is not allowed to be a fan. That shit's annoying. And their tendency to bitch about every adaptation for lack of accuracy. And I'm like, it's an adaptation. That's literally, like, by definition, what it is. They're adapting material for a different, medium. film is different than comics. Film has a budget, for one. Graphics have limitations, et cetera, et cetera. That's things that art, that's limits art doesn't have. So I only really mention that to say this. I can understand the Marvel nerds' angle at not liking Iron Man 3, but I can't imagine a better Marvel movie because it's one of the first, it's certainly the first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie to honestly look hard in the face and be like, what is the consequences of being a hero? You can't live that kind of lifestyle and not have it eat at you.
And I fully agree with all of that. That's a great analysis of it. I don't come from a Marvel background. I don't come from a comic book background. I read some comic books growing up. I mostly stuck to non-mainstream stuff, things from Dark Horse, going back to Predator. Aliens versus Predator comics were like some of my favorites. The Mask or whatever that might be. But so I don't come from that background, and I love this from a Shane Black background because it does take chances. And Shane Black's ability to write quippy dialogue benefits the Tony Stark model more than anything. If you tried to give him any other movie, I don't know if he would have worked as well.
I think having Shane Black come in to do his version of a broken hero really works for this movie too. Because Iron Man's not broken in a normal way. He's got PTSD from I mention this every episode or every couple of episodes, but he actually has like a legitimately Lovecraftian experience. He experiences something so beyond his scope, it literally breaks him as a human being. And what's interesting is Iron Man 3, besides being a really decent action movie with kind of a fun through line and some really, really great set pieces, is the exploration of a broken man and how he puts himself back together like a suit of armor. It's actually a wonderfully themed movie if anybody would get out of their Marvel nerddom far enough to look at it.
Yeah, and I think going into it, I'm sure Robert Downey Jr. had a lot to say with Shane Black coming in because they did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang together prior to this, which was one of the films that started to resurrect Robert Downey Jr.'s career. Along with Shane Black's career, they had to build themselves back up. And Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was, Joel Silver kind of came in and gave them a blank check to be able to make that movie as kind of a last ditch effort to say, hey guys, like I still believe in you. But so it's fun to see them that where they have to rebuild their lives together and then they get to celebrate by dropping this movie that makes $1 trillion across the worldwide, and particularly it did well in China and things like that. So
It had a monster American opening and then doubled it in China the week after. Yeah.
it's insane stuff. So for me, that's exactly why I picked it for the weird. I'm glad to see that we actually agreed on this. I'm a little bit shocked that we agreed on this because I
totally thought we'd miss on.
because I was like, oh, Iron Man 3 is weird, partially because it's a little bit safe. It's him playing in a studio system that he's played in before, but that had essentially
Play safely in that because I mean we also sort of missed the elephant in the room when you're talking about it with Marvel fans, which is, as you mentioned, they didn't love necessarily that portrayal of the Mandarin, but I thought that shit was brilliant. Like, give me Ben Kingsley as like weird British soccer fan Mandarin any day of the week.
Yeah, and then backing it up with Killian, played by the always phenomenal Guy Pearce.
Love Guy Pearce.
Yep, and I think that for me that kind of works as this and also as an examination of how white people misappropriate culture and things like this. Was this white man who adopts this moniker of the Mandarin for his own business schemes, and I know that's why a lot of people didn't like it, and that for me that was actually kind of a reason I did like it, because like that was it, again, like with a lot of the Iron Man movies, there's always like it's Tony Stark and then evil Tony Stark is the villain, whether that's the guy from Iron Man 1 or the other guy with the arc reactor, Whiplash in Iron Man 2. In this one, it's also an inventor in Iron Man 3. We get it again and again, but it kind of works for me, and I really like that interpretation. Don't get me wrong, I'm really looking forward to Tony Leung as the Mandarin in the upcoming film.
And like you and I are both kung fu nerds. Yeah, I could not be more excited for Shang-Chi.
Yeah, I mean the guy's a phenomenal actor, and Shang-Chi is going to be phenomenal. I have complete faith not complete faith. I shouldn't say
Mm.
that. I'm gonna remain a healthy skepticism on it, but I do have a lot of excitement for that film, and I hope that they do it
Saying
right.
behind the camera sounds right, though. At
Yeah,
least, yeah.
yeah, I'm all about it. So, but anyway, so that was my choice for the weird, and your choice was Iron Man 3. So, which I guess brings us to the final category of the day. Let's talk about what's your choice for the wild.
So for a change, I am actually using my wild card to rave about another movie that I love. About a year before Iron Man, air quotes, saved Robert Downey Jr.'s career. Yeah, you shortstopped me on that one. uh, Outstepped this little neo-noir darling, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. In all ways, the absolute essential black movie. The Long Kiss Goodnight was me playing favorites, but this is probably like actually his best film as a film. I could not effuse enough praise on Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, on top of being just a great noir detective story, like actually a great, with a very Chinatown ending at that. His dialogue and the quips between Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer are just non-stop in this movie, and they are hysterical together.
Yeah, and it goes into I love Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I think it's a phenomenal film. It's actually a film I watch every Christmas.
Like, just everything about that movie is amazing.
Well, and I think it's an interesting because it is kind of a throwback to that, like you said, noir style with a narrator, you know, a troubled narrator, an untrustworthy narrator who's going through all of the story, and it plays up to the strengths of both Shane Black as a writer and as a director, to the strengths of Robert Downey Jr. as playing a flawed but charming protagonist, and then it even plays up to the strengths of Val Kilmer as that who's funny, but he plays that straight guy really well,
Yeah,
which is,
and
um,
he plays arrogant really well, which is
yeah,
not a lot of people utilize. Like this in The Saint, basically, but he does it really well.
right. And I think he's pretty arrogant in real life from what I hear. And I hear he's tough to work with, right? I've heard that again and again, and that's why like Tony Scott has always worked with him a lot because Tony Scott was one of the few people that could really get a great performance out of him because he knew how to work with Val Kilmer. I've heard that time and time again. But Val Kilmer, I think, is a phenomenal actor. And Shane Black brought a really good performance out of him and allowed him to just be in his element and really, like you said, spit fire back and forth between him and Robert Downey Jr. And it works. It works so well. You get ridiculous black humor set pieces. I mean, I've never laughed so hard at somebody peeing on a corpse
Mm.
before. Like I like that whole set piece, and when they throw the body off the roof and it hits the dumpster wrong, like good stuff all the way around.
Even stuff like the classic having an argument in the doorway and she slams the door turns into one of the funniest moments in the movie when she opens it back up and is like, "Did I just cut your finger off?" And he's like, "Yeah."
It's so good. I love that fucking movie. So I highly appreciate that you brought that up because that didn't make my list. And I felt really, really ashamed that it didn't make my list. So I'm glad that you brought it up. And it actually segues pretty nicely into my choice for the wild because in a very similar film, I chose The Nice Guys.
Oh, I was honestly hoping that would be on your list somewhere because that's the other one I really wanted to talk about. I love The Nice Guys.
And it's the perfect pairing with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang because they're both throwback films to a certain type of kind of pulpy writing, whether it's noir or the detective story or whatever that you might be. They're almost like sister films in a lot of ways, the way that the buddy humor works in it. I chose The Nice Guys, number one, particularly because I feel like I need to bring attention to it. It is a film that came and went,
Mhm.
and everyone I talk to hasn't seen it. It's not that they love it or hate it. It's just it's a movie that I feel like not enough people actually got to see, which is a shame because it's got so much good material in it. He takes some wild swings. You've never seen a movie that portrays the pornography industry in such a way that this film does,
Sure.
as more of a business, and does some really interesting things in it, like message wise and small details.
Well, and
And
even weird little details I think in this one are kind of interesting. Like you hire Ryan Gosling as the scumbag character, and you hire Russell Crowe as the nice guy.
The tough guy, the nice guy, tough guy. Um, and Ryan Gosling, their
Oh,
chemistry is impeccably good in it. But Ryan Gosling, I mean, he's a great actor. He's one of those actors that I know that there's a lot of cinephiles out there that think he's overrated or blah blah blah. I like that he chooses strange films continually. He oftentimes plays against type unless the script is good.
someday we're gonna do Nicholas Winding Refn, and you will hear how much I loved Only God Forgives.
Yeah,
I know people
and
against that movie, but I love it.
we'll have to argue that at a later time. But I just think Ryan Gosling owns this. There's the scene when he gets drunk and he falls down the hill. He does the fake gun shooting scene with the lady, falls down the hill, he's drunk, he lands by the tree, ends up finding a dead body, right? And he does the greatest like reinterpretation of an Abbott and Costello like bit that I've ever seen, because I'm a huge Abbott and Costello fan, where he can't speak, he's so scared he can't speak, and he's just like and he nails it. He nails it. That scene kills me every time. I'm on the floor rolling, laughing.
For
That,
me, for me, him doing the classic tough guy trope of breaking into a house by elbowing through the window, but he slits his goddamn wrist doing it.
it's so good. He does that all the time. Even like in the bathroom scene where he's on the toilet and he can't keep the stall door open. I'd never realized that. I mean, I knew he was funny. I'd seen him in Crazy Stupid Love is a weirdly good kind of dark romantic comedy that I like. I think he's phenomenal in that. I didn't realize how funny he really was, even at like slapstick humor, until I saw The Nice Guys. And once again, it just kind of gives him an extra layer of as an actor. But even for Shane Black, I think this was him kind of strutting his stuff after Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
You hear me mention his particular smart kid trope, usually in an annoyed way, but this is the best version of it. Like, the little girl in this movie is phenomenal.
Yeah, and what's interesting is she's really the heart of the film. The movie's called The Nice Guys, but she's kind of this emotional core to the film. I love that she's the take no shit, like talk it forward. The scene where they're being held hostage and she rolls in the cart and then takes the coffee and splashes it in the lady's face, but it's cold. And Ryan Gosling's like, "Love the idea, dear. Just keep rolling with it." Like he's trying to be supportive to her, even if he's like a complete asshole and off his and in a really bad situation. I think The Nice Guys has a great comedy, great energy, a really heartfelt story about family and kind of looking into that. There's a lot of interesting elements there. And then, like I said, there's a really interesting setting between the pornography industry and the automobile industry of Detroit. He has a lot of things to say in this movie, which, Shane Black has a tendency to have a lot of things to say, but not necessarily that are super deep. He's great at quipping, but he plays in tropes. And The Nice Guys had a really interesting commentary to it about how we view business. And I think that's what makes that movie one of his deepest films, and it works really well for me. In fact, it was really, really close to being my good. Like I had to sit there and think whether the Nice Guys or Lethal Weapon was going to be my choice for good. So that's why I ended up putting it in the wild.
That's a fine choice. A fine, fine choice. But I think with that, we've pretty well covered the career of Shane Black. And I don't, honestly, for this one, I don't feel like we have any major gaps. Nothing. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm remiss to not talk about Monster Squad.
Fair enough. We're both horror nuts. We've at least got to touch on it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I'm remiss and it was for at one point or another was in all four categories for one reason or not. We did mention about he has a tendency to have people call little girls bitches in his movies. This is the one that for a kids movie always kind of tickles me pink when Dracula picks up the little girl and calls her a bitch, and you're like, wow. It kind of works.
Where we learned Wolfman has nards.
Eh,
It's. But there's things I like about Shane Black is he's the sort of guy who will just ask a question like, well, if the only thing that can kill a werewolf is silver, then what happens if you hit him with a grenade?
That's a valid question.
And it's a valid question. This movie actually answers it.
And I just like his ability to kind of mix genres and humor, and I think that works for me in the Monster Squad. I've listened to some podcasts recently that do not have favorable reviews of the Monster Squad, which I understand to a certain extent. I do think that at the time period, it's something that I grew up with, so I certainly have I have nostalgia goggles on for that kind of a movie, which is why I ended up not putting it in any of my categories. But I think we would be remiss not to mention that, that was his collaboration with Fred Decker, and I think that movie is a fun one that a lot of people love.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But otherwise, that was Shane Black.
Shane Black. All right. Yeah. So that kind of wraps up our episode on Shane Black. So we want to hear from you guys, out there. Reach out to us. Let us know what your favorite Shane Black movies are. Give us your good, bad, weird, wild. You can certainly reach out to us on social media. You can reach out to us on our Facebook page. You can reach out to us at Twitter, which is at nffpod. And we're happy to, we're trying to get all of our social media going. So we're happy to kind of discuss things with our listeners and whatnot. You can always reach us at nffpod.sean, SEAN, at Gmail. Send us your thoughts there. We would love to also hear what you guys would like to hear from the show. If there's any particular cinematic voice you want to hear on the good, the bad, the weird, the wild, or maybe there's a franchise you would like us to discuss over on our normal podcast, No Franchise Fatigue. But we just want to hear from you guys. Would love to kind of interact and get the ball rolling. Don't forget to share us with your friends. We're always happy to. The more the merrier. The more the scarier, I guess, especially when you talk about people online. So that's going to be how it goes. But I guess we should talk a little bit about maybe what we got coming up for the rest of Black Christmas, Sean.
Yeah, so the next episode of No Franchise Fatigue is going to be cleverly Black Christmas.
Yeah, maybe not so clever, but we're trying. Okay, maybe we didn't try very hard. But Shane Black, that was fun. Please feel free check out the original Black Christmas, Black Xmas, which is the first remake, and then the upcoming new Black Christmas remake from Blumhouse, which drops in theaters December 13th. So check those out. Hopefully you had some fun watching Shane Black movies with us. I know I do. It's always good to revisit, especially for the holiday season. And in the meantime, watch some movies, guys.